Good afternoon and welcome to the WISE Forum. I'm Don Guttenplan. I'm the education writer for the International Herald Tribune, and I'd like to welcome you. We're going to be talking this afternoon about identifying what works in environmental education. So if you went to the morning session, you know there are a lot of problems, but we're going to solve all of your problems this afternoon. And if the panel can't solve your problems, then you, the audience, I'm sure will furnish solutions. So we've got students, a student, we have a knowledge farmer, and we have a researcher. So without delaying any further, I'm going to go around and ask our panel to briefly introduce themselves and talk about their own involvement in education. Paul Clark.
Good afternoon and hello. Welcome, panel. My work focuses on working with schools and communities in different parts of the world, and we run a project called the Pop-Up Foundation. Pop-Up is really simple. It's based around the idea that we picked from successes of the past. So we looked into what worked in the past 2 centuries in Western civilization and saw that one of the things that's pervasive around the world are motor cars. And we thought, who was it that introduced the motor car to the masses? It was Henry Ford. And so we apply Fordism to sustainability. And we basically play with the idea of getting messages out to the masses through different systems, schools being one of them. And we do it in unexpected ways and in unexpected places like football clubs and hospitals. And basically break the mold of what education is, and we do it with a degree of non-conformity. So we don't just sit inside the existing system. We very much avant provocateurs to change it.
Okay, so Paul, you bring the environment to places where the environment has never been before.
Star Trek.
Our next speaker is Dr. Fumio Kagawa. Fumio, please tell us about what you do and how it relates to education and the environment.
Thank you very much, Don. It's my
that mic is fine, but make it louder.
Okay, this is my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Don. My name is Fumio Kagawa. I'm from the Sustainability Frontiers. This is an organization, non-governmental, non-profit organization. It's an alliance of sustainability and global educators. We are dedicated to really transgressing the boundary of current sustainability education, mainstream sustainability education, which still have a very narrow mindset to address sustainability. We address mixture of threat, not just environment, but also human society globally. We try to envision, theorize. The research is also one of the important part, and also put transformative mode of sustainability into practice. And we really embrace intrinsic value of environment. We operate from the holistic worldview. And recent our work was consultancy work for UNICEF and UNESCO, looking at the climate change education, developing a teacher training program, also looking at the disaster risk reduction in curriculum.
Disaster reduction. So
disaster risk reduction.
Disaster risk reduction.
Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, we have a WISE learner, wise in every sense, Ahmed Almir. Ahmed, welcome, and please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, my name is Ahmed Almir, and I'm a WISE 2012 learner, and obviously Qatari national. I'm a student at Weill Cornell Medical College. So I have a few forays into the field of environmental education. I suppose firstly I'm a member of the Green Team in Cornell, and we're an environmental awareness group. So we work to promote green initiatives in Cornell. We work to educate people on how can we better the environment, how can we start up a recycling program, how can we be more aware of the area around us, how can we tread more lightly, as Pop-Up Farm so rightly said. I mean, I've seen education in different contexts, and I suppose in terms of what I can offer, I'm a student, so I am inside the learner's system. I am the one who's being educated.
You're on the receiving end of what?
Exactly, yeah, I am at the receiving end. So.
Well, we're gonna converse among ourselves for a very short time, but I want to encourage those of you who can hear my voice and would like to participate in the conversation to please come and come a little closer if you like. And we're going to also be taking questions and statements from the audience very, very shortly. Because the idea is this is a forum, so you, the audience, are at least as important as those of us up here. I want to begin a little bit against the current, because we are going to be talking about what works in environmental education. But of course, the only way you find out what works is by trying things, and often when you try things, they fail. So I'd like to ask Fumio and then Paul to talk about their experience of failure in environmental education. What are things that you've tried that didn't work?
Should I start? Yes. I think what does work, what doesn't work, often depending on your aim and the purpose of environmental education. If your aim of environmental education or sustainability education is really personal and collective empowerment, take action for these urgent issues, then we got to evaluate a program in that way. There are a lot of, I'm not just pointing on one particular project or country context, but in generally speaking, still a lot of environmental education is really knowledge-based, passing on the fact and figures, and also more lecture manner. Yes. That sort of pedagogy and the content of learning doesn't really create the personal empowerment. Sometimes just overwhelm learner because they are just daunted by the fact they face.
So if you're just giving people a torrent of facts, that doesn't work because it doesn't engage with them. Are there any specific initiatives that you've tried, Paul, that you thought, well, we're not going to do that again?
Oh, there's millions of efforts.
Tell us some of your horror
catastrophic failures. Okay, one of the things that I did recently with a group of teachers and schools in Burnley in Lancashire was I had the idea that it would be interesting to grow something out of the ground that would be unusual in our environment in East Lancashire. And for those of you that don't know East Lancashire, it's just about as different as Qatar could possibly be. It rains all the time, and it's very, very lush, but it's pretty cold. So we left there at 0 degrees.
So no palm, you couldn't grow palm trees?
Well, this was where we went manifestly wrong, because I decided it would be a good idea to grow kiwis. And we set a challenge for the schools to try and grow something that they would not normally eat, and these kids regularly wouldn't touch this stuff. And secondly, would be interesting because it comes from another part of the world, and it would be, I had all those great aspirations to join the dots between different countries and get people interested. Anyway, these things grew to about a metre high, and we were very excited. But what we failed to realise was you have to have a male and a female kiwi tree in order for them to cross-pollinate. So you're learning all the time in terms of the relationship with nature. So that's just one little example. I suppose my big answer to that in the broader sense is that everything we've done so far as a human species since modernisation has failed. And the evidence is quite clear. We're now on a 6 degrees Celsius trajectory towards the end of the century with climate change, and that we have to really, really, really re-evaluate exactly what we are trying to do in the whole context of education. So it's big and little stuff, if you like, both ends of the spectrum. We fail daily in our personal lives, and we fail fundamentally in the way we conceptualize what our world should be like in terms of its relationship with nature.
So part of what we have to do is to face up to the fact that if we have failed, and even though we're talking about sustainability, sustaining our current course is sustaining a failure. Yeah. Ahmed, I wonder, we were talking this morning about whether environmental education should be its own discipline, sustainability studies or environmental studies, or whether it should fit inside of sciences or geography, or what are as a learner, what are the sort of the areas of environmental learning or sustainable learning that you've had that have made the biggest impact on you? Are there specific classes or specific projects? What worked for you?
Well, what's worked is really what's provided me with a really simple expression of what it means to be sustainable. So, I mean, we talked about trail-studying yesterday. I'll just explain to the audience again. Cornell University, my parent university in America, has come up with this innovation of trail-studying, the idea of taking away the trays that are used to serve plates in dining halls. And they've done this, and it's come to great effect. It's reduced the amount of food wastage in the dining halls, because normally you'd take a tray and you'd pile on all your food, and then some of it would go uneaten and it would get thrown away. So they've limited people to the amount of food they can carry with them, and hence they've limited food wastage. And when you do something like that, and then you tell us, well, we've saved 1 ton of food, and just to show you 1 ton of food is those 50 boxes of rice that we've stacked up there by the wall, that's a powerful, clear message. That's something that really shows you what you've managed to accomplish. On the flip side, something like a lecture which gives you a succession of facts, which tells you, as Fumio so rightly said, just gives you a list of facts, isn't very powerful, because what's happening is you're just listening to another lecture, and you listen to many of them, and you have the tendency to sort of to zone out. To zone out. Yeah, so I suppose an important illustration of this is the book Schools That Learn by Peter Senge he says quite rightly that students will remember about 10 to 20% of what they read, but they'll remember about 80% of what they do. And I think that's really important in learning.
Now getting people to actually do things, that's your specialty, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah. I'm a great advocate of sustainability being around hand, heart and mind. And that what we do is we get people to grow food as one of our starting points, because that makes a direct connection to the natural environment. You can do that inside as well as outside for those of you that live in blocks of flats or in offices or whatever. And it's perfectly possible in environments like this to create green space. And in fact, one of the really interesting innovations going on at the moment is the ways in which we reinvent the urban space as a food environment, partly for food security, partly for carbon sequestration, but also to reconnect the human mind with the natural. And I'm absolutely adamant that that is a way in which we can start to transform our cities and create much, much more aesthetically beneficial places, but equally informative places through which we can learn about what true sustainability is. So it's a very hands-on experience in the project.
Fumio, I wanted to ask you specifically in disaster risk reduction, maybe because I'm American and so we're focused on our recent natural disaster, but we heard this morning about natural disasters in Nigeria. So clearly it's a problem in one form or another that everybody on Earth can relate to. Aside from scaring people, which may be an effective tactic to get their attention, what are the ways that you find are really work in terms of educating people and getting them to change their behavior or their thinking?
Yes, that is actually a very big topic, and actually empirical research is still limited, because that to really see that change through the research, it hasn't been done very much. But recently we have conducted curriculum research around the country, 30 countries around the world, well, more than 30 countries. Government are committed to put disaster risk reduction element into school curriculum. So there are a lot of progress has been done in a different manners in different countries.
So give us some examples of places that have strategies that you think are really clear and effective.
For instance, Indonesia, there is strong governmental force behind it. So the commitment from the top level obviously making a difference. Another important thing we found in Indonesia is that there are very strong civil society networking opportunities. So the NGOs, academics, or school sectors, they are really working together, really sharing, collaborating together.
So a strong leadership, strong civil society. Are there other elements that you...
Yeah, another thing, coming back to your point, Ahmed, is a really pedagogical aspect. A lot of countries include content of disaster-related knowledge, attitude, behavior. But if you don't use particular pedagogical approaches, that the message doesn't reach to the student to enhance their behavior change and attitudinal change.
So what kind of pedagogical approaches?
What we found is really not just a cognitive, knowledge-based pedagogy. really use socio-affective learning, for instance, using emotional. Then also I want to emphasize that people have a different learning style. Some students learn very well using a cognitive manner, but some students learn using a music, maybe drama or physical activities. A lot of education does not respond to the diversity. I think this is quite an important issue when we address disaster-related education, but sustainability in general as well.
Another thing I wanted to throw out to the panel, and maybe I'll start with you, Ahmed, is the question of, are we changing minds first or are we changing behavior first? Because I think of my experience not as an educator but as a parent, where my children are terribly concerned about the environment except when it affects their own rooms. Where no matter, they may think that the whole planet should be cleaned up, but that doesn't mean they want to put their pajamas away. So I wondered whether, can we get people to change their minds without changing their behavior? And isn't it behavior that we really care about? Or do we need to change minds first? What's your view?
That's a very interesting question. I think it comes back to Fumio's area of work, where she talks about disaster risk reduction education. I mean, first and foremost, when we talk about access or the right to education, we talk about why people should deserve education or why they should need education. And so many people still don't think that it is a right, because they don't see they see it only as facility so much as you need it to get a job. As students, we're taught that there's such a large volume, a large body of knowledge, that unless we cull that knowledge and we learn what we have to, we're not going to be competitive enough, or we're not going to get high enough grades to progress and to get into the most competitive jobs or the most competitive businesses. So now we're taught that we have to learn what we have to go where we have to go. And as you said, your children are interested in the immediate environment because that's what they feel is most pertinent to them. But if they're not made aware of the fact that being sustainable is also pertinent to them, then they won't pursue that. As a medical student, I had to worry about, or as a pre-medical student, I had to worry about my GPA, I had to worry about my grades, I had to worry about where do I want to go for residency, because that's going to help me get where I want to go. So we had to teach people, how is sustainability also going to help you?
Okay, Fumio? Is it minds or behavior, or what's the order? How do we do it?
I think both way. I mean, maybe if I would say, some people maybe, make a structure, maybe in a school or a society. If there is a structure, they got to follow. By just doing it, some people sort of internalize that behavior. For instance, recycle, for instance. There is a system they can follow. Some people, respond to it. But that I think this is just only one way. Other people may not respond that way. Really connecting yourself in a bigger problem is, of course, important issues.
Paul?
That's one of those devil questions that I knew you were going to ask, because I'd like to suggest that it's both, but that sounds like a cheap opt-out. But the reason why, I think, is because what we're trying to do is shift consciousness on the individual level and the collective level. And it almost asks us to suspend our current understanding, and that's a very difficult thing to do, because we're transcending from a way of thinking that we've all become ingrained in under the modern economic global community, which is that notion that everything is about economic progress. And in a sense, what we're saying, or I feel I'm saying, is perhaps we have to question that zeitgeist, that hegemony, and ask the question slightly differently and say, is there a different form of human progress, human civilization, that we need to migrate towards rapidly if we're going to get across this century? And that therefore requires both individual and organizational and system level change. And I think that that's the frame of reference that I use. And I say it's consciousness because clearly we can do this. We've done it in the past, and we still have...
What do you mean by we've done it in the past?
We have indigenous communities all over the planet, which are unfortunately under huge threat, but who have sustained life on planet Earth quite happily, with culture, with civilization, for considerable amounts of time. I've just recently been out in Australia in the central region in Uluru, and I was walking with people in that community who've lived there for 27,000 years. The footprint of human species there is almost negligible. But those people have a culture, they have a language, they have a story. It's evident in the way that they relate to place, that they have a way of understanding self that transcends self and goes into different time frames. But that's the challenge we have, to get beyond the immediate into some sort of perspective on this that goes beyond our individual preoccupation and takes us to a different way of thinking about our relationship with each other and our communities and our world.
Fumio?
Yeah, I agree with what Paul said, and I think the change of consciousness and including mind and behavior is urgently needed, especially the wealthy part of the world. It's not. I think we have a differentiated responsibility to address these issues.
A differentiated responsibility.
Yes.
Can you? I think you need to be very clear. Okay, differentiated how and whom?
Well. This issue of climate change, obviously, the way Western country, wealthy part of society operated our society really caused a problem, although there is people who still question about it. But in my point of view, this is a problem. The way we structured, operated our society has caused a problem. Then people who has contribute very least are suffering most. This is a global social justice problem.
So you can't really separate the question of sustainability from social justice.
Of course, yes.
And you're making the point that we in the West broke it, so we should fix it, or we should at least bear most of the cost of fixing it. I wanted to ask, I mean, I'm hoping we're going to say something that's so outrageous that people in the audience feel they can't contain themselves. But one of the questions you were talking about...
I want to come back on that fix issue. Just
okay,
before you
come back on fix.
The fix. You see, the fix is the assumption that this is linear, that one thing clicks to another, perhaps. I don't think it's like that. I think that we've got fixed in the mindset that everything can be solved very quickly. And actually, we're not in a fix in the sense that we can do this within a generation. We're doing this, in a sense, at a starting point of a series of intergenerational baton handling now that takes us way beyond individual lives, because the catastrophe we're in is more than the people around this room at the moment's lifetimes. This is an intergenerational problem that we're not grappling with.
Wait, I'm going to stop you.
Yeah.
Because if you call it an intergenerational problem, aren't you letting our generation off the hook?
No, I'm saying we've got to do something now, and we've got to do it by being
non-conformist. But you're saying we can't finish solving it, but we have to start.
We've got to start it, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
But when Ahmed was talking about sizing up which classes to take, which internships, it was in the context of an ideology that, for lack of a better word, I would call competition, which is something that we definitely glorify, and that in a way, Western wealth and influence in the world is built on successful competition. But can we solve this through competition? Can we make solving this a competition, or do we have to change how we think about competition in order to solve it? I know you like to think philosophically, Ahmed, so I'm going to throw that to you.
Well, I wanted to go back to your point about should the minds of people change or should their behaviors change, and hopefully I'll address your question sort of through that. So I think the big difference between, let's say, sustainable environments or cultures and non-sustainable ones is the fact that there is a culture of sustainability. There are rules, there are regulations, there's policy that tells people how to be sustainable. Sort of, there are recycling programs in place in those countries. There are cars that have to conform to certain health regulations or standards. They can't emit a certain amount of CO2 gas. So then the question becomes, is it your society that's taught you sustainability? Because then it becomes a culture, and then it's in your behavior. And then I think eventually it becomes incorporated into your mindset, as opposed to some cultures where you have to go out and you have to look for chances to be sustainable. In my college, there aren't many student-run, or there's only one student-run sustainability or environmental awareness group. So we have to actively go and try and find ways to be sustainable. Whereas some people will actually bring it to you.
Now, do you think,
So-
I'm going to be rude for a minute.
Yeah, no.
Do you think that the reason that there's only one group at Weill Cornell Qatar is because you're in Qatar and you've got abundant mineral resources and abundant wealth, and so why should you worry?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think it's just the fact that people haven't become aware of it. I mean, we can say in one sense, America has abundant resources, or at least a university has abundant resources.
America's not doing a brilliant job of
Well,
sustainability. Let
definitely,
me
yeah,
just make that clear.
But I mean, let me compare now. I'll draw a comparison between the campus we have here and then the campus we have in America. And the campus we have in America is vast. There's a huge multicultural society. There are so many things around you. So let's say it feels richer, okay? However, within that, there's still many groups who are promoting sustainability. And as you said, they're promoting it via competition. So the awareness is there, and they've created mental models to try and make this awareness constructive, to try and make it easily transferable and adaptable to everyone. But I think here, we're just starting out. So I don't know if it's a case of, I don't know if it's an issue of wealth or resources. We could get into a debate about how necessity drives innovation. But I think it's an issue here of we're still flourishing and we're still growing. So it might take a few years for people to develop that culture or to develop that awareness.
So it's partly a sense of consciousness. Now, I'm going to open this out, and I know we have one questioner who I can count on. So I'm going to call on you to ask the question because you primed me. But please, do now jump in. When you speak, please say who you are and where you're from, and then ask your question. And you're welcome to ask questions to the whole panel or to one specific person. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Katrin Heeren. I'm working for the German Commission for UNESCO, and I'm responsible for the Secretariat of the UN Decade for Education for Sustainable Development, the implementation in Germany. Therefore, I'm very much thinking about these issues and have been thinking about them for a long time already. I'm very glad about this inspiring discussion, but I'm also a bit frustrated because things don't happen as fast as they should. I'm always wondering, how can things be accelerated? How can action be accelerated? There's a study that has been developed in Germany on the big transformation of society, transformation from a fossil society to a post-fossil society, because this is part of the problem and also of climate change. I was also wondering, we have this decade on education for sustainable development, a crucial element which is not recognized as such yet in the way we think it needs to. And I'm also wondering, you have been talking about that also before, sustainable development and education for sustainable development are certainly not words that are you cannot grip them easily. And that's why it's hard. You need to, yes, it was said before, you need to talk to people to get their emotions and to really integrate them. So how can this process be accelerated the way we need it to accelerate?
Okay, so how can we connect with people's emotions better? How can we get change to go quicker? And also, I'm going to do a quick poll of the audience. How many of you think there's a problem with the word sustainability? Does anybody think that's... Okay, so there's some... And I'm going to come back later and ask, better words. Anybody come up with suggestions? Feel free to tweet your suggestion, but we're going to come to a point where we're going to hear suggestions for replacing sustainability, so what you would replace it with. But first, let's go around the table this way and respond to the question of how do you get people's emotions engaged, and how do you get the sense of change to be accelerated and made urgent? Is that right? Okay, Ahmed.
Well, I'd say give them something they can feel. Give someone something that's completely pertinent to them right now. So if you want to talk about water treatment, tell them that the average African child only gets so much water to drink, and they'll think, wow, and show them a glass and say, that's how much water they have every day. And they'll think, well, okay, I need to start thinking about sustainability now. Because if you put it as a fact, it's not as powerful. So I think it's engagement, it's hands-on, it's make them see, make them feel that.
Fumio?
I want to make a 2 point. I think we have to use an old nodal point, not just top down and bottom up, but we should find out every opportunities to accelerate change. This is one answer to your question. Another one, engaging the emotion. I think especially people in a wealthy part of the world, they may not see this urgent issue in everyday life. They prioritize their examination or their jobs or something immediate. What is happening in other part of the world is something very remote, maybe disconnected. They don't feel about it. I think that is part of the problem. I think peer learning is very powerful, especially young people. Use the story of someone in Africa or Latin America who is really experienced this issue in their everyday life. And there is if I remember correctly, say WWF has something called climate change witness. So there is a short story of real people's life available.
So connect people with real people and connect young people presumably with their peers.
Yes.
In places that are more at the sharp edge of facing climate change or environmental peril. Paul?
Yeah, don't get me started on sustainable development. I think I'm absolutely with James Lovelock on this, that we are really needing to look at sustainable retreat. Full stop. Put that on one side. What do we do? As Ahmed said, we go to the emotion. We talk to what people are passionate about. I happen to be on a project called the Pop-Up Farm Project at the moment where we're working with football teams. People are passionate about football. It's a global project in the sense that there are global football teams. It's a huge audience of people who perhaps day to day wouldn't really think much about sustainability. However, because football teams are passionate about, and football fans are passionate about their teams, they're capable of actually connecting to huge audiences and passing very powerful messages to their client groups. So we worked with schools, and we bring the schools together to talk about relationships with those teams. And we just set challenges. So and as Hamia says, one of the really interesting pieces of that is bringing children to talk to peers and then going out into the public domain like a football ground. So what we did was we took a group of kids in Lancashire and we linked them with a group of children in Parabong in Uganda. And we said to those children, talk to each other about what it's like to live in each other's places. So they start a conversation. It was difficult because the communication systems weren't easy. What we then did was said, what would be a good crop that would give you revenue, an economy, which could be built as an eco-economy in your environment that would help you to connect the conversation further but bring revenue back in so you can feed your family in your farming community. And we set up, through the children, in these are 11-year-old children, a coffee company called the Thoughtful Coffee Company. We bring coffee into Burnley from northern Uganda. It's brilliant coffee. It's amazingly tasty. And the families in Uganda that are the coffee farmers also have their kids in school, so they've got a direct relationship with the school and the community there. The coffee is then sold. This is rather convoluted. The coffee is then sold in England at the Burnley Football Club to the thousands and thousands of football fans week after week. And that story seeds itself amongst that community. The profits from that project, and this is coming back to an earlier point about what type of systems might work, the profits from that get then taken directly back to the farming communities in northern Uganda, which is struggling to get out of the legacy of civil war. And we use the football connection again in those environments. We set leagues up. We've been working on sharing that network in other parts of the Ugandan community. And it's really, really simple to push these messages to big audiences and start to give some sense of hope, possibility, engagement, and practical economic value to this so that they can earn a living, but not have to earn a living in a detrimental way. They can build benign, eco-friendly environments to grow in.
So part of what you're saying is you've got to, if you want to get people's emotions, you've got to go to where their emotions already are and to where people already are. So go where the crowds are, in a way. Yes, we have a question from the gentleman in the center there. Please say your name and it should be all right.
My name is Bilal Shakir, and I'm one of the WISE learners. My question is to the entire panel. I wanted to ask, I'm currently researching about sustainability in Education City and in Qatar. So part of my study, we're trying to find out how can we promote sustainability in the case where, sustainability exists only in islands of efficiency. So the term that Stephen Hertog used back in 2006, that islands of efficiency exist in the Gulf. We're trying to examine how can you diffuse these green ethos, these sustainable ethos from these self-proclaimed elite islands of efficiency. I mean, I'm not suggesting anything, but one could argue that all these forums, everything that we see, all of us over here, we don't exactly represent society, do we? We don't represent the 95, 96% of the people who are out there. 96% of the people out there don't even know what the word sustainability means. So my question would be, how can we ensure that this green ethos about about environmental awareness and green awareness sort of diffuses and permeates throughout society, because it is only after we, everyone in society and those 96% are aware of sustainability and sustainable education, that any initiatives in environmental education will be successful.
Okay, I'm going to slightly sharpen your question. I think your question is, how do we get the message out, and how do we diffuse it? I also want to ask whether there's something in the nature of the message that keeps it from getting out, whether it's, whether you're saying retreat, and if you're in the developing world, a retreat sounds like I'm on the ship and I'm pulling up the ladder so you can't get on board, or whether the message isn't getting out because people are afraid of it because it involves social justice issues that they don't want to raise in their societies, they're afraid to raise in their societies. So, please feel free to come in on either of those points. How do we diffuse the message more broadly, and also, is there something in the nature of the message that needs to change or that's creating resistance? I'll start with you this time.
Thank you. It's a great question, Bilal, because in a sense it's the universal question. How do we move minds? Yeah, I think that back to where I was with football, really, we have to look to where human beings organize themselves and connect. Mobile phones, okay? Little example. If you use a mobile phone, you can get all sorts of things pushed at you now with the technology. Mobile phone uptake, both in the developed nations and the emerging nations, is massive. And it's almost like a universal connector. If you, for example, created a system whereby you had daily push technology, just saying, what do you do about water? Posing little questions. If you incentivize it, and we touch the multinationals, for example, to do a bit of payback, and say, we will fund and resource some of this stuff to incentivize neighborhoods. You connect your neighborhood, you ask the question in that neighborhood there, how much water reduction can you deal with to manage your daily lives? And if you do it, we'll reduce your rates. We'll reduce your costs of your daily living. So you've got more revenue. To then, and this is the catch, not to go out and buy loads of glitzy stuff, but to reinvest in future or existing infrastructure that helps you to develop further your ecological consciousness in your neighborhood. So it has a direct effect on the quality of your life. And that's the ways in which we've been playing with it in the Pop-Up Farm project. It's very, very practical, but it hits people in the money, in the wallet. It incentivizes them to participate and become actively engaged in it. And it's using technologies that are readily available already. So we don't have to invent other things. We just have to create decent apps and make that next step happen. So those are the sorts of things we're playing around with at the moment to try and achieve what you're suggesting.
Fumio?
Yeah, it's indeed a big question. So Paul gave a very good strategy, but I approach it slightly differently. Maybe we really question what do you mean by good life. You know, we operate our society from the past assumptions. If we're just carrying on this society, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to your children and grandchildren generation? What society do you want to pass on to them? I think unless we really address these fundamental issues, well, we can use a lot of new technologies and strategies, but this is a very important question. But without addressing these core issues, there's so many messages, you know, flying around, but may not be very effective. So it takes a long time, but it's very, very important issues to address.
But do you think there are too many messages flying around? I mean, do you think there's too much conflicting advice? Do you think there's...
There are so many nowadays because of the technology. There are so many information on website, the internet, but people tend to go to the source they already know, they are familiar with, so not necessarily expanding their perspective.
Right.
That's also the problem.
Ahmed?
So on the question of how can we spread really the definition or the meaning of sustainability, I'll say, I mean, I think it's really important, as I said, to build a culture of sustainability. So let's think about even a road system. Some road systems are designed to be highways. Some road systems are designed to have bike lanes next to them. So if you consider the two different populations, naturally one population will cycle more. Hence, you have more sustainability. So you've taught people, or you've created the culture, and it's inherent in their culture, it's inherent in their way of life. So maybe you don't necessarily have to teach them.
You mean because it's just there? You have to make it a fact of life.
It just has to be a fact of life. Maybe some things...
I mean, I know I have a friend who's an architect in New York, and he proposed, partly as a mental experiment, but it was partly a serious proposal, that they take one lane of every street and take it away from traffic and use it for local recycling or for just vest pocket parks, for sort of small parks for kids to play or for people to walk. But the idea is that if you weave it into the fabric of life, then you're not having to beat people over the head with it. But that takes a certain kind of social vision, and it takes a certain kind of leadership, which doesn't seem to be in great supply.
It does, I suppose. There is an example, a really interesting example in Copenhagen of that very thing about restructuring the infrastructure of a city. And over the last decade, Copenhagen has systematically increased the amount of bike lanes and reduced the traffic lane to one lane. But as they've done that, they've also aligned the traffic lights so that as you cycle into the city as a worker into the town, the lights, if you're on a bike, stay green. The lights, if you're in a car, stay red. So you sit for a lot longer in your traffic light. It's engineered, effectively, a completely different behaviour pattern amongst people because there's far, far more people now using bikes in Copenhagen than there were a decade ago.
I think that also ties in with your idea. We have to incentivize sustainability. How can we make it a benefit for people? Because then if people know what they're getting benefits for, as Fumio said, they're going to look for that information. So then their society is their source of information, and they say, well, why am I getting a benefit for being on a bike? Why am I getting? Why is there a carpool lane? What's carpooling? Okay, if I carpool, so I'm being sustainable, and yeah. So I think it's really as we talked about, is building it into the fabric of society, and then incentivizing, giving people reward for it, so that they inquire and become curious, and hence find out what it is.
But I wonder whether we're not, in a way, patronizing people by saying we're building it into the fabric of society, because maybe another way of looking at it is, shouldn't we be making people more aware of their choices? You know, so that instead of making it possible to recycle without even thinking about it, which might be nice, but it might also be nice to say, well, you have this can, and you can either recycle it or you can throw it on the ground. You know, and make people aware that when they're contributing to the mountain of garbage, they're contributing to the mountain of garbage. When people are, you know, over-consuming, that they're taking things away from people. That there's a way in which maybe we need to make choice more explicit, and that leads me ineffably. Oh, not ineffably, effably. Okay.
Well, okay, effably. So just a little interjection on that. Maybe the issue of sustainability is so important that we can't make it a choice anymore. maybe we really have to act now, as Paul said, because it's an intergeneration gap. So I think up till now we have had the choice, and we do have the choice today.
Good.
But is that choice benefiting us now? Are we really going in the right direction with that choice?
Yeah, there's something that intrigues me, and WISE is a great example of it, really. When you bring nations together and they start to form ideas, we've done it in the past, and we've done it when countries do things that internationally are not acceptable anymore. And I don't know where this takes and how this happens, because I don't understand international politics, but I just don't get why, when we know what the science is, and we have a thing like the United Nations doesn't turn around and say, okay, countries that don't start to hit these sanctions are seriously missing on the sustainability agenda, and there will be penalties to pay. Now, I know it sounds rather domineering, but actually we are at that point of crisis where we have to think globally and act globally, and leaving this to nation states may not be sufficient anymore.
But maybe before you get to coercion, we should try shame.
Yes, that's true.
Fumio.
Yeah, I sort of echo the important question you raised, Paul. You know, I totally about of course, the democratic participation is important, but also it takes time. Because we face this urgency, do we need a more sort of strong intervention from the government or a law to allow certain behavior, not the other? It's a really difficult question. But considering the urgency, would that be something we are talking about?
Yes, we should be talking about the urgency, and also it may be that there are different answers for different societies.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be that in democratic societies, people have a responsibility, and maybe they're better able to fill it, or maybe they're not. Maybe education, for example, is failing in its mission to educate citizens what they need to do. But while we were briefly hovering around the notion of choice, I wanted to ask, for those of you who agreed with my suggestion that sustainable might be not the best word, what are some other words of people in the audience, any candidates for replacement for sustainability? We can have a forum on whatever this other word is next year. Any of you who raised your hands want to venture any ideas? Yes, you.
Well, not a real replacement for sustainability, but as I said before, maybe it should be framed in a more positive way and in a more active way, like transformation. I think if we talk about we need a transformation now, transformation of society, it can really mobilize resources if it's done in a right and responsible way.
Well, it's
more dynamic somehow.
Yeah, there's more dynamic, and there's something inherently conservative and perhaps even soporific about sustainability. The idea you just carry on as you're doing, well, then you fall asleep at the wheel. Yes, ma'am.
What I don't like about the word sustainability is that it has no... my name is Eva, I'm one of the WISE learners. And what I don't like about this word is that it has no translation to my language, which is Polish. So whenever I talk to my parents, I try to tell them that I'm campaigning for sustainability.
What do you tell them then?
Sorry?
What do you tell them? Do you know sometimes people take a phrase and they put it in Google Translate,
yes,
and then
yes,
they put it back. So put sustainability in. What happens in Polish?
The whole concept, and it goes really awkward. But apart from that, I think that when we talk about sustainability, we're too much hooked on the environmental aspect of it, and people don't really see that sustainability is like at least three things, which is society, environment, and economy. And we should always think about those things. So I think that the word itself, how it is in English, as long as we don't have to translate it, is a good one, because it has this notion of limited resources, of using those limited resources wisely, and really conveys it. But I think we should really promote those three different areas that are within it, and we should always remember about them.
Well, we've been talking about sustainability as if it's purely an environmental matter. And we really haven't talked about the economic or the sort of social structure dimension. And I wondered whether, maybe that's part of what renders it dull for people, is that they feel that it's safe. I mean, when you work in communities, Paul, I know that Burnley is not the most prosperous community in England. So how do you get people there to connect with the sort of economic aspects of sustainability? Or do you not?
We don't talk about sustainability. We talk about how you're living. What are you doing in your council houses, in your communities? What could you do that would improve the quality of your life? Now, that has two sides to it. It has both a value side and a utility side. And in many of the families that we're working with, they don't, 3 generations of unemployment. So you're in an environment where work is, you're right. The work in the traditional sense is no longer part of that community because the industry of the past, the cotton industry, has now gone to another part of the world. So the whole idea of what's the fabric of our community as it moves into sort of a post-industrial environment is a big question that people are thinking through in their daily lives just to make a meal, but at the same time they're anxious for their children. And so what we've been doing a lot of the time with things like social housing groups who own a lot of the housing and manage it on behalf of the families is to talk to them about how they could improve the quality of the infrastructure so that you're in an environment which becomes much, much more interesting to be in, first of all. So it's not just grass.
So the environment isn't a jungle in Africa or a river in South America. The environment is a housing estate in Lancashire.
And what you do is you plant food. We plant perennial trees. We plant indigenous trees that are heritage trees, so you're keeping the legacy of what was there in the past. You're putting that food into that infrastructure in such a way as when 5, 10, 15 years' time, you can walk into that environment, you can walk around, and that food is available on the trees, and it's in the bushes, and it's in all sorts of new ways of thinking about using that urban landscape differently. And that's ever so easy. It's not a difficult thing to do.
Ahmed, you want to say something?
Well, addressing your question about how we address the social or the economic aspects, I think maybe in a medical sense we have, because we've thought about public health and we've tried to weave that in with sustainability, particularly in the field of bioengineering. So we've had really innovative ideas such as how can we create plants that will fix nitrogen into soil so that we can have sustainable agriculture, so we can grow on that land year after year after year. Or how can we engineer bacteria that will reduce lead pollution in water? So in that sense, we've moved into economy. I'm not sure about society or the social aspects, but definitely the economical are there on the technological front of how can we be more sustainable.
Fumio?
I think each community of the particular context have a most urgent entry point. There's a phrase, something called you start where you should hurt. What is the immediate problem you want to address, but not losing the whole framework of this issue. So say if you start addressing, say, poverty in the community, but starting from there, then you can reach out to environmental or social aspect sort of inclusively. So what I try to say is in each context you can find out a particular entry point, but really connecting into expanding it to other aspects of sustainability.
I think that's a really important point. I remember once hearing the great activist in the US, Bob Moses, who organized the Mississippi Summer for voting rights in the 1960s. And he said he never thought that voting was the main point, but it's what the people he talked to in Mississippi thought was the main point. And he said you have to put your bucket down where you are. So maybe part of the point in environmental education is to listen as educators and to find out where people are and what your point of entry is. And in that spirit, I'm going to solicit more comments or questions from our audience. Is there anybody who would like to contribute who hasn't been heard from? Oh, thank you. I'm terribly sorry. You're behind me. I hope I haven't been keeping you waiting all this time, sir.
My name is Adel Sharaf. I'm the founding dean in Habib University, Pakistan. I like first to start by finding a better word for sustainability, which is an Arabic word, which actually can be a verb, a noun. It's called yuhsin or yuhassin. And the word in Arabic means improve, develop, sustain, beautify, make it functional. And if you look at the dictionary in Arabic for the word yuhsin or yuhassin, it has almost about 100 meanings, and all of them in the positive sense. To the extent that Habib University in Pakistan adopted this as the slogan for the university. And there is a saying about Ali, which is a cousin of the Prophet, which means the value of any human being is measured by how much he can improve himself, the society, life, environment, and everything. So this is a side of it. My question now is that you touched on the final stage in environmental sustainability and the need to act using the carrot and the stick. The carrot and stick will be the only way for us to address the problems we have now in the decay in the environment. And I'm looking at the carrot in the way of gain to communities, rebate to customers, money in your pocket, and all these things are wonderful. But the stick will work more beautifully if you start adopting policies, regulations regarding efficiency, regarding waste, regarding processes that contaminate the environment, and so on. So the combination of the carrot and stick, you require really a global approach to address the problems we are facing, because we are entering a new era where it's not only sustainability of the environment, it's energy shortage. I live in Karachi. 2 or 3 hours every day there is no electricity. And every house or apartment have its own generators. And the generator is using fuel. And the fuel is a waste of thing. If you look at renewable energy or other methods by which you enhance the efficiency of the electrical system, which I'm an engineer and it can be done, you can save 20% of the wasted energy in an electric grid. So the carrot and the stick, using a global United Nations spearheaded policy or requirement would be the only solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I think
Can you tell?
I'm Najma Najam from Pakistan, and I am Vice Chancellor of a university in the Karakoram and Himalaya Mountains. So therefore, sustainability is a real, and disaster risk management is a reality for us every day. And I think the difficulty with the word sustainability is because the realities for each one of us in each of the regions is different. And for me to understand the realities of Africa and their sustainability, and for them to understand the difficulties of the mountains and, of course, the desert, are entirely different. So perhaps we need to have a word which encompasses the different realities.
Or maybe a word that stresses how interconnected we are.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've now had my back to this side of the room, so there you are.
Thank you. I believe the...
Can we have your name, please, sir?
My name is Bakari Kone. I work for the African Capacity Building Foundation. I believe one of the reasons why the whole debate is complicated is that we think of environment as a punishment of the villain human being who are destroying the health. So my interest is really how we can talk about environment in terms of progress, in terms of how we can, while we are minding the environment, improve the life of people in conjunction with all what they're doing every day to improve their own life. So it's a matter of vocabulary here, but it's so important to tell people you can improve your life while you're preserving your environment.
Wait, but I'm slightly confused. Are we preserving the environment or are we mining it? Because they don't usually amount to the same thing.
Well, okay, let me come back to the debate you raised earlier, which is a very important one. It was, should we, I think you said, should we repair the mines now, or I can't remember your
or
own
actions.
word. Or actions.
Behavior.
I think we should do both. Like your panel said, we should do both, because if you spend too much time trying to fix the minds, it will be too late for some aspect of the environment. But on the contrary, if you do the actions immediately without working on the minds, the actions are not sustainable. I'm sorry. I don't find a better word for
No, I think in that case, that's the right
My
word.
Arabic is not so good, so I would have taken your word, sir. But, so really what I'm trying to say is, can we improve the vocabulary so that we give incentive for populations to improve their life while they are also careful with the environment and they're making everything sustainable?
So people have to be shown and convinced that there's some improvement in their own lives, that they have a stake in this, Were you about to say something in the middle, sir? It doesn't do to be subtle with me because I won't see you. You have to be really gesture.
Yes. I am Steve Maxilien. I come from Haiti, and I make part of the Learner's Voice program. So, in my country, a lot of, I'm a third year in agronomy. So, in my country, some students and even some decision makers think that there's an opposition between ecology and development. I should want to know how we can convince them that ecology and development are not in opposition.
Okay. I'm going to leave that to the experts. How do we convince decision makers in a country like Haiti, a desperately poor country which desperately needs development, but which also has suffered a great deal of environmental degradation, that environment and conserving the environment and development are not incompatible? Paul, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Steve. In a sense, it's a universal question in the environments in other places as well, which are grappling with this problem. I think that, first of all, one of the ways that clearly in crisis settings that needs to happen is that we need a sense of hope and possibility, which implies community. And this is, for me, where schools play such a central role in this. First and foremost, because they bring people back together again to congregate and to collectively think about what they're going to try and do. So there's a pedagogic implication behind that as to how you organise learning in schools so that people have participatory roles in this. Secondly, that there is a clear understanding in many places of place, both the place that we had, the place that we're in, and the place we might want to be in the future. And that in a sense, provides a frame of reference for action. And then the opportunity to tap the skill base of people and recognize that some of the skills which maybe are necessary to make the big argument are not necessarily the types of skills which traditionally we've accepted as being valid within our education systems. They've not been valued. And I'm thinking of things like farming. The fact that the farmers feed people is, in, say, the UK, almost ignored. We have only 1% of farmers. The politicians, therefore, take no attention to what the farmers are saying about the changing environment because they're not a political pressure. However, if you start to galvanize communities and you start to say to people, how do we improve your place? What type of cooperation, along the WISE concept here for this conference, what type of cooperative values and actions can start to really give people a sense of agency and demonstrate that through activity, perhaps led by the school community, then you begin to create what I've always felt education is for: emancipation, social improvement, power for people to start to make choices, both on their own and together. That is a threat for politicians if they don't listen. And we know that worldwide. And I think that that's the sort of mechanism that I would be advocating from both our project, but I've witnessed in places that are in considerable stress because of climate change. And those are the sorts of project developments that we're undertaking.
Fumio?
Okay, you touched on very, very important issues. One of my answer to you is really use the existing international framework which government already committed. For instance, Convention on the Right of the Child. Around the world, a lot of government already signed up. They have a responsibility as a duty bearers. And you know that's something they have to be responsible, not just the government and also civil society, including parents, community people. Adult has a responsibility to protect children's right to develop, survive, protect right for.
So one of the things we do is reassure people that that the right to develop is part of each child's right. So it's not something that we're opposing, or that is opposed to environmental action.
Yeah, here I'm not talking about economic development, obviously, but I think what I'm trying to say is there is a framework which government already committed. If you look at this text carefully, these two things have to be really reconciled. You know, you really can't develop by, harming the environment. So using that framework would be the one of the entry point. Would that make sense?
Yes, lady over here. I'm sorry, Ahmed, I'll come back to you in a second, I promise.
Susan Gillespie from Bard College in the States. I want to speak to the sustainability question. And I have an idea, I don't know whether it's a replacement for the term or more of a slogan, but what about preserving the future? Which has a kind of paradox, because preserving, we usually think about it as the past, and future, we usually think about it as something separate from the past. But if we don't change our ways, in fact, we will lose both.
Thank you. Interesting. Ahmed, did you want to come in on the development versus environment question?
Yeah. So if we talk about an area like Haiti, an area that's stricken by environmental disaster and also needs to develop, I think we're really talking here about environmental solutions, creative solutions that are shown to people to be cheaper, to be adaptable, to be accessible to everyone. I mean, Paul tells me that pop-up farming is flat packing diversity. It's the idea that you can take a solution in one area and you can use that solution somewhere else, albeit maybe with different resources or in a different context. So let me give you an example of this. So Cornell University has a society of civil and mechanical engineers who created a program called Agua Clara. And what Agua Clara does is they've created gravity-powered water treatment facilities. So instead of having electricity, instead of running on fuel, you just use simple gravity. So think of the adaptability of that to any country which is disaster-stricken. Now they don't have to worry about having an electrical infrastructure. They can use the resources around them, and they can economically develop to have water treatment facilities without having to worry of that cost, without having to worry of developing and having all of that technology in place. So I think, in one short sentence, creative solutions and innovation to help merge the two together.
I think that's right, and I think it's interesting because the challenge you posed is exactly the challenge that comes up again and again to advocates of environmental restraint. Is, well, if you're restraining, how are we going to develop? And I think what Ahmed suggests, which is that we have to be more creative in our thinking.
There's a project I would love to do within the Pop-Up Farm project, which came from a guy that I work with a little bit in New York, and he suggested that it's perfectly possible to grow a city. So, and I'll come to why, all right?
You mean like from seeds?
Yeah. Over the last millennia, human beings have developed a strategy of pleaching. It's bringing together trees and you build structures. So they become, rather than using steel, you can build 3-4-story buildings by building the infrastructure. And it's been done in India through building bridges over the millennia. And it's a really interesting idea of an experiment to carbon sequestrate, to enrich the environment as an edible space, but also to create places to live. And we've been pitching this idea for a while. I think WISE should go for it, But the idea that you grow a village, literally, and you create it over a decade or so, and it becomes a living environment physically and part of the infrastructure. Now, that might sound very far-fetched, but actually we're not that far away from doing that in terms of what's possible, because we're beginning to bring together the technologies, and this is where Ahmed's right. The whole convergence between things like bioengineering and the sustainability agenda emerging in a different sort of way. And I love that idea of hacking the problem. And you bring in the open source solutions and you start to really play with it. Coming back to what you're saying, it's not an isolated village anymore. It's part of a global challenge that we just need to play with differently. And if we start getting into that frame of mind, you know, the potential for human beings is extraordinary. You know, you have to be in this place to realize what the sort of vision can be. Question is it going to be sustainable for us, and like you say, for the next generation and the 5 or 6 or 7 generations up front, which perhaps should be part of the ethic of our plan, that we don't just do it for now. We start to think multi-time forward. You know?
Ahmed, did you want to come
Sorry,
back?
I just wanted to add, so when you said we're part of a global culture, I think that's definitely true. And one thing that Society of WISE-Qatar started on is that they have an open source model, i.e. their ideas are free for everyone. And as opposed to coming up with an innovative idea and then making a patent on it, why don't we allow everyone to have that idea? Because as you said, we're connected now and we need to help each other. So when an agricultural company comes up with this fantastic new strain of GM crop, which supposedly helps the environment, maybe it's time to start sharing.
Well, I mean, it's yes, maybe it's time to start sharing, but you know, how do you exert the pressure? How do you set the examples? What are the incentives? The incentives for sharing in our environment are not.
You come back to what you said earlier. You shame them. If corporations won't play in this, we shame them into moving their position. And there's plenty of companies now moving rapidly in this direction. So I think there's a question that can be raised about what's the role of corporate business in the global shift that needs to take place.
We've got a question over here, and then I think I've got time for one more, maybe 2 more. So, ma'am, your question, and then if anybody else feels the urge, please don't be shy because we're running out of time.
It's more of a comment than a question.
Comments are welcome.
Yes, so you're asking about the incentives, and also I've heard a lot of talking here about the emotions and acting upon people's emotions, and the main question of this debate is what works in environmental education and how we can work, especially with young people. And I haven't heard anybody saying that fashion is what works with young people a lot. And from my experience, I can observe around myself and my environment that what really worked was making sustainable behaviors fashionable, making them cool. And I live now in Prague, in Czech Republic, and what happened there is that a lot of NGOs kind of got together and they were doing different things. It was like a cycling NGO and taking care of refugees NGO, sort of like really different fields. And they decided to make sustainable behaviors cool. And they started doing events like swap parties. They hired great designers and movie makers for their campaigns. And now my peers, young people of my age in this city, they only ever go for coffee for like fair trade, organic coffee. They give each other like sustainable gifts made from trash, and they make those events. And what is even more empowering, they try to involve the whole community. So they, for instance, ask their neighbors, their elderly neighbors, to form a community garden together so that they can learn the gardening skills from them that they don't have anymore. And that's just became extremely cool thing to do. And that's what really works with young people, because they all want to be cool, they all want to kind of belong and be appreciated by their peers.
So we should harness the force of fashion. Great idea. Great idea.
Just a short intervention.
Sure, of course.
I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think the adult may think, oh, you know, young people or children should do this, that, but people themselves have a good creative idea. That's a wonderful example. So give them opportunity to think about how they can, you know, create that change process by themselves.
Fantastic. Do we have a final question? If we don't have a final question, I'm going to give everybody on the panel a chance to briefly wrap up. If there's something you wanted to say, oh, there you go. We've finally forced you out. Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Mine is about not about.
You need to tell us your name first, please.
Okay, my name is Mokre. I'm from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa University, particularly from the Environmental Science Teaching Unit. Yeah, maybe I don't know. I can't specifically refer the question to any one of the panelists, but generally for the panel, how about the development limit? When we talk about sustainability, isn't it about efficiency and sufficiency? When do we say development is enough?
Ah, okay.
The
How much is
the
enough?
limit of development.
The
Yeah,
liv-
there are
the-
talks
the-
about different pathways of development these days.
Now, okay, we've got 3 people from 3 different cultures. So let's get 3 answers on how much
Thank you.
development is enough. That's a great last question. Thank you, sir. Ahmed, do you want to go first? How much is enough?
How much is enough? I mean, that's a big question. It really depends on what society thinks is enough, right? I mean, in Qatar, how much? I think when you fulfill the needs of society to become educated, to work in the global marketplace, to I think be able to exchange ideas. So maybe it's sort of a question that answers itself, because when you're sustainable, then you're developed enough. Until then, you have to keep developing so that you can have a society that will last infinitely, right? I mean,
Okay.
maybe.
So it's an infinite process, an infinite loop. Fumio?
It's a very, very important and difficult question. My effort to answer your question is this. I believe basic need of human being have to be met. That's fundamental human rights. So that is important. But beyond that basic human need, we should cut our greed.
So more need, less greed.
Yes.
Okay. Paul?
Thank you. It's one of those questions that in our project we always puzzle, and I can't say that we've come to any real conclusions on that, but I think there are some pointers. There's more than 1 billion people on the planet are hungry. There's more than 1 billion people on the planet who are obese. And there's at least 1 billion people on the planet who are moving rapidly towards diabetes because of diet. There's something fundamentally wrong with our food system. It's not sustainable, and yet it's meant to sustain life. That's the first point. So we have to rethink that rapidly and make it more equitable. So that social justice point comes in. I think the other thing that I look for in the project, and I think we struggle to do, but we continually try to do it, and this comes right back to the beginning, what do we fail at all the time, is the capability in demonstrating to people that ecologically conceived projects do not have to exclude human beings from their remit, but they have to ensure that it's integrated, that we are part of the solution with nature. So in a sense, my feeling about where we are as a species is we've learned a lot about what we can do technologically, but we haven't yet had the humility to realize that nature does this amazingly well and has done for millennia, and we can learn an enormous amount from it if we just open our eyes. So a move from ego to eco seems to me to be one of the points where we would know that we'd done enough. And one last thing, Thomas Sankara, who is one of the people who was once president of Burkina Faso, had this wonderful saying, and I want to just read this because it's something that I held very close to our project, and it picks up some of the themes of the talk. You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from non-conformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. I want to be one of those madmen. We must dare to invent the future. What you're asking is how we dare to invent the future and take the leap. That's perhaps an imaginative leap as well as a practical one. But we must do it, and we've got to do it very, very quickly.
Thank you so much for listening to our panelists. Thanks so much. Those were fantastic contributions. And to WISE, thank you. I hope you all have a great rest of your conference, and thanks very much for being with us. Good afternoon.